Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to dive deep into something kind of hush-hush. But let's be real, it's something we all think about. Infidelity.
Oh, juicy.
Yeah, and we've got some research that goes way beyond the usual relationship trouble stuff.
Right. Like, get to the real reasons why people cheat.
Exactly. So we're not just skimming the surface here.
Nope, this is a deep dive, baby.
You got it. And the research actually challenges this idea that infidelity is always a symptom of a problem.
Oh, I like where this is going.
Yeah, it's like that saying, looking for your keys under the streetlight.
Like the streetlight effect, yes.
That's it. We tend to look for answers where it's easiest, not necessarily where they actually are.
So true. We assume cheating means a relationship's doomed or someone's a terrible person.
But this research suggests that sometimes it's less about what's wrong and more about a search for something more.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, the source actually frames infidelity as a form of self-discovery, even a quest for identity.
Whoa, hold on. Self-discovery through .cheating. How does that work?
It's not as simple as it sounds, but hear me out. They use this woman, Priya, as an example.
Priya. Okay, what's her story?
So she's in this seemingly happy marriage. Husband's great, attentive, the whole 9 yards.
Sounds idyllic. So, what's the problem?
Well, Priya ends up having an affair with this guy, who is the complete opposite of her husband. An arborist, covered in tattoos, drives a pickup truck.
Not exactly the typical upgrade scenario we often assume, huh?
No, not at all. And that's what makes Priya's story so interesting. It wasn't that her husband was lacking. It was that she felt like she was missing something. A sense of adventure, maybe a little rebellion against her good girl image.
So the affair was more about her than him.
Exactly. She even talked about how it made her feel like a teenager again, sneaking around, hiding in his truck.
That forbidden fruit, huh?
Totally. It was the thrill of breaking the rules, a side of herself she'd never let out before.
So it wasn't really about finding a better person, but about becoming a fuller version of herself.
That's a great way to put it. And this idea ties into what one sexologist, Jack Morin, calls the erotic equation.
The erotic equation. Now I'm really listening.
He says passion isn't just about attraction. It's about attraction plus obstacles.
Oh, that makes sense. The harder it is to get something, the more you want it.
Right. It's like you want what you can't have. And for Priya, that sense of transgression, that forbidden aspect, was incredibly alluring.
Especially since she'd always played by the rules before, so the affair was like this intoxicating taste of freedom.
Exactly. But it does raise a really important question. How can we reconcile this idea of self-discovery through an affair with the pain it causes?
Right, because let's be honest, affairs hurt a lot. They can
Yeah.
be devastating.
Absolutely. And Source doesn't shy away from that. It acknowledges the pain while still trying to understand the motivations behind it.
It's like trying to hold two opposing truths at the same time, that something can be both transformative and destructive.
And that's where things get really tricky, ethically speaking.
No easy answers there, that's for sure.
Definitely not. But before we get too deep into the ethical debate, the source also explores this fascinating concept of the allure of unlived lives.
Oh, interesting. What's that about?
It's this idea that sometimes infidelity isn't so much about the other person, but about who we might have been.
Okay, now that's making me think.
They use the story of this guy, Dwayne, as an example. Happily married, but he's still got this lingering what if about his college sweetheart.
The one that got away. Ah, we've all been there.
Right. And with social media, reconnecting is easier than ever. Suddenly, that what if becomes a very real temptation.
It's like opening a window to a parallel universe, isn't it? A glimpse into who you could have been if you'd made different choices.
And the source argues that sometimes affairs are a way to recapture those lost pieces of ourselves, even if it's through a flawed and hurtful method.
So it's not about finding a better partner, but about reconnecting with a lost version of yourself.
Exactly. It makes you wonder how much we edit ourselves in long-term relationships.
You mean present a certain version of ourselves, the one that fits the partnership.
Right. And in doing so, maybe we lose touch with some of our other facets, those desires and dreams we pushed aside.
And that's where the temptation of an affair can come in. It's not necessarily about finding someone better than your partner, but about rediscovering those hidden parts of yourself.
Those yearnings you've suppressed.
Yeah, exactly. It's a form of self-discovery, but one with potentially huge consequences.
For sure. And speaking of exploring hidden parts of ourselves, the source introduces another fascinating case, Io. His story takes this idea of self-discovery through infidelity in a slightly different direction.
Okay, I'm all ears. Laid on me.
Io's story brings up this idea of exiled emotions.
Exiled emotions.
You know,
Intriguing.
He's someone who's always been very guarded, avoiding vulnerability. But through his affair with this woman, Cynthia, he starts to experience a whole range of emotions he'd kept bottled up.
Like he's unlocking parts of himself he didn't even know were there.
Yeah. The source calls it developing a new emotional literacy.
Wow. So the affair, in a way, helped him become more emotionally intelligent.
It seems that way. But here's where it gets even more complicated. Io's wife, Julie, is obviously deeply hurt by the affair.
Of course, that's understandable.
But it's not just the betrayal, it's also that Cynthia represents the woman she could have been. They're both successful in the same field, a field Julie gave up to focus on motherhood.
Oh, wow. So Julie's not just mourning the betrayal of her marriage, she's also grieving a version of herself she sacrificed.
Exactly. The affair becomes this painful reminder of a life she didn't choose.
And that adds a whole other layer of complexity to Io's situation. He's gained this newfound emotional intelligence, but it's come at a cost, a huge cost.
It's almost like he's gained something while simultaneously inflicting a loss on someone else.
That's a tough one to reconcile.
For sure. And that's where the real challenge lies for Io. Can he truly empathize with Julie's pain? Can he understand that his need for emotional exploration has come at a huge cost? Tough questions, and ones we'll have to explore further. But before we do, let's just take a quick step back and recap some of the key insights we've uncovered so far.
Sounds good to me. We've covered a lot of ground already.
We sure have. We started by challenging that streetlight effect, the idea that the most obvious explanation for infidelity is always the right one. Then we dove into Priya's story, which showed us how affairs can be a way to access those parts of ourselves we've kept hidden, even if it's at the expense of our primary relationship.
And then there was Dwayne, whose story highlights the allure of unlived lives, the power of nostalgia. It's not always about finding someone better. It can be about reconnecting with a lost version of yourself.
And finally, we have Io, whose story brought up the concept of exiled emotions and how affairs can sometimes be a way to access and explore those feelings we've suppressed.
So we're seeing that the why behind infidelity is far more complex than just a lack of love or satisfaction in a relationship.
It's about self-discovery, unlived lives, even the power of transgression.
It's about the messy, complicated reality of being human.
Absolutely. And that's just scratching the surface. We'll be back after a quick break to delve even deeper into these ideas.
Yeah, wait.
It's fascinating how this research goes beyond just labeling people. It really tries to understand these individuals, their stories, their motivations, their struggles.
Right, like it's not just about pointing fingers and saying, you're a cheater. It's about acknowledging the human element, the complexity of it all.
Exactly. So where do we go from here? What happens with Io and Julie? Last we heard, he was suggesting a polyamorous arrangement, which, knowing Julie, probably didn't go over too well.
Yeah, Julie's not exactly the open relationship type. And that's where, according to the source, Io's new emotional awareness, that emotional literacy he developed, is put to the test. It's one thing to feel those emotions himself, but can he truly empathize with Julie's pain? Can he understand why this is so different for her?
And for Julie, who has always been so stoic, the challenge is to let herself be vulnerable, to express her hurt, her anger, even that sense of loss she feels.
It's like they're both being pushed outside their comfort zones, forced to confront these deeper emotional truths.
So how does that play out? Does the source offer any guidance on how to navigate this kind of situation?
Well, it doesn't offer any easy solutions, which, honestly, I appreciate. There are no easy answers when it comes to infidelity. But it does suggest that the real opportunity here for both Io and Julie is to use this experience as a catalyst for a deeper, more authentic connection.
Even if that connection is born out of pain and betrayal, I mean, is that even possible?
That's the question, isn't it? It's about recognizing that relationships are always changing. And sometimes it takes a huge shakeup like this to make you reevaluate what you really want.
So maybe instead of viewing the affair as the end, they can see it as a turning point, a chance to build something new.
That's the hope. But it's definitely not a guarantee. The source is realistic about the challenges. There's a lot of hurt, a lot of trust to rebuild. And honestly, even with the best intentions, Io and Julie might not be able to overcome it.
Which brings us back to that question, what can we learn from these experiences? Even if we don't condone the behavior itself.
Exactly. Because even though the source focuses on the motivations behind infidelity, it doesn't ignore the consequences. The pain, the betrayal, the lasting damage, all of that's part of the equation.
So for our listener, What are some key takeaways? What should they keep in mind when thinking about infidelity?
Well, first, remember that streetlight effect we talked about? Don't jump to conclusions. You might not have the whole story. There could be deeper motivations at play.
And those motivations aren't always bad or selfish. Sometimes they're tied to this very human need for self-discovery, for exploring different sides of ourselves, even if it's through messy, imperfect ways.
Exactly. And like we saw with Dwayne, sometimes infidelity is about longing for those unlived lives, recapturing a lost part of yourself. It's not always about finding someone better, but about reconnecting with a forgotten piece of who you are.
And like with Io, sometimes those hidden parts are our own emotions, feelings we've pushed down. And an affair can become a way to finally access and explore them.
But it's crucial to remember that this kind of exploration often comes with a price. The pain you inflict on your partner is very real, and there's no guarantee your relationship can survive.
So understanding the why is only half the battle. The other half is figuring out what to do next, how to move forward.
And that's where honest communication is vital. Having those tough conversations, acknowledging the hurt, and trying to understand each other's needs, even if those needs have led to painful choices.
It's about recognizing that relationships are complicated. We all make mistakes. But sometimes those mistakes, as difficult as they are, can be opportunities for growth, for deeper understanding.
I love that. It's not about condoning the behavior, but about finding the meaning, the potential for growth within it.
Exactly. And I think that's ultimately what this source is trying to convey, a message of hope and possibility, that even in the face of infidelity, there's potential for healing, for change, for building a connection that's more honest, more genuine.
Beautifully put.
Well, this deep dive has given me a lot to think about. It's challenged my assumptions and shown me that there's so much more to this issue than meets the eye.
Me too. And I hope our listeners feeling that same sense of expanded understanding. It's about moving past judgment and approaching this topic with curiosity, compassion, and a willingness to see the complexity of it all.
So as we wrap up, I want to leave our listener with this final thought. What if, instead of just asking, why did this happen, we start asking, what can we learn from this? What if we use these experiences, as challenging as they are, to foster greater honesty, vulnerability, and a deeper connection with ourselves and our partners?
I love that. What a powerful way to frame it.
It's about finding meaning, even in the midst of heartbreak.
Absolutely. And with that, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive.
Thanks for joining us. We've covered a lot of ground, from the psychology of desire to the potential for growth and healing. It's been a real eye-opener.
It has.
And as always, we encourage you to keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep. You know, one thing that really struck me about this research is that it doesn't try to tie everything up with a neat little bow.
Yeah, it leaves you with some things to ponder. Doesn't try to oversimplify.
Exactly. It acknowledges that there's no one-size-fits-all answer when it comes to infidelity.
Real life is messy, right? Relationships are messy. And I think that's reflected in the research.
Absolutely. Before we wrap things up completely, there's one more point I wanted to touch on. This idea that infidelity, even though we often see it as a symptom of a problem, could also be a catalyst for growth.
That's an interesting way to look at it. Like, instead of just focusing on the damage, we ask, okay, what can we learn from this?
Right. What's the message behind the mess, so to speak? What's this experience revealing about ourselves, our needs, our desires, maybe even our fears?
The source suggests that sometimes infidelity forces us to face those uncomfortable truths about ourselves, the things we might otherwise avoid.
Like with Priya, right? She realized she was living a life that wasn't truly her life. Or Dwayne, who discovered this longing for a path he didn't take. And even Io, who, through his affair, unlocked all these emotions he'd been suppressing.
So in each case, the infidelity, as painful as it was, also served as a wake-up call.
Yeah, a push towards self-discovery.
And it's not just about individual growth either. The research also hints at the potential for growth within the relationship itself, even after something as devastating as infidelity.
So, using the crisis as a springboard to rebuild. But how? Where do you even begin after something like that?
Well, it starts with honesty, vulnerability, being willing to have those tough conversations, and really listening to each other's needs, even if those needs led to some bad choices.
It's about understanding that relationships are constantly evolving. What worked in the past might not work anymore. And sometimes it takes a major shakeup to make you realize that.
It's like hitting the reset button, I guess. Painful, but maybe necessary.
So even though the source doesn't shy away from the harsh realities of infidelity, it does offer a sense of hope.
Yeah, it suggests that even in the midst of betrayal, there's potential for healing, for growth, for creating something stronger, more authentic.
This has been a real eye-opening conversation for me. It's definitely challenged some of my assumptions about infidelity.
Me too. It's definitely made me think about things in a new way.
And I hope our listener feels the same way, that they're walking away with a deeper understanding, maybe a little more compassion, and a sense that even in the most difficult experiences, there can be opportunities for growth and transformation.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into infidelity. We've covered a lot of ground, from the psychology of desire to the potential for healing and growth.
It's been a journey, that's for sure.
As always, we encourage you to keep exploring, keep questioning,